Hi, everybody. Here we are, Chapter 15, and considering marine ecosystems today. This one's particularly close to our heart down here in South Florida. We are surrounded by water. Many of you have been into the oceans and around and have actually seen some of the areas which may be referenced in this presentation. So this is Science Under the Sea, right? Today we're going to look at aquanauts and how they explore an ecosystem at the brink, underneath the ocean. Aquanaut, yes, is a play on word on the astronaut. And then you too could be an aquanaut by getting the proper training you will need to go scuba diving. And if you already are a scuba diver, hopefully you can promote these ideas among your peers through some first-hand interactions and encouraging folks to get trained to go scuba diving, to go down and look at everything that's down there. Part of the reason why this is an issue is we can't see down into the oceans much as easy as we can see, say, trees being knocked over. So it's kind of like the out of sight, out of mind mentality. Although it is happening, most of us can't see down below the water and therefore don't have a full grasp of what's happening. Those of you that can, scuba diving, snorkelers, skin divers, whatever, spread the word and let's see what we can do. But as a result of this chapter, we will be able to understand some of the causes and consequences of ocean acidification. We're going to look at how environmental conditions determine the location and makeup of marine ecosystems. We'll look at some threats to complex coral reefs. And obviously, of course, we can see what you can do to help conserve these critical marine ecosystems. I, for one, am a scuba diver, and I've been down diving all over the place, and it is a absolutely phenomenal thing. It is wonderful to be able to go down and see the diversity and see all the different animals and species really existing within each other and interacting with the tides and currents and everything else that happens in the marine environment. So as you consider the Science Under the Sea idea, if you want to go and do more under the water, let us know or contact your friends or seek out some other way to help you explore and get prepared to go training underwater. It is something that you need to prepare to do. You can't just go dive down there. You want to be safe when you do everything. But looking into marine ecosystems, we can see that the marine ecosystems contain a huge diversity of life, but are in peril as a result of things like pollution and overfishing, misuse of resources, and from today's release of carbon dioxide from fossil fuel use. Today's choices will have a large influence over the future of the oceans and ecosystems, and I will point out that will have a large influence over worldly conditions of oceans because, as you'll notice in one of the films that you'll watch in this section, we can refer to this as basically one world, one ocean. The oceans are separated into 7 or so different oceans and some other seas, but they really are connected all at once. So we'll be able to look at a lot of this stuff that's going on under the water. We're going to understand a little bit about some underwater experiments and some data collection methods that help us understand the physiology of the coral reef species and the response to these changing conditions. So the issue here is that the physiology of the coral reef species is changing, and it's changing in response to what we perceive to be the change of the ocean's chemistry, biodiversity, and human interactions within these within these oceanic conditions. So that's what we're looking at. We're going to continue the thread of this idea of how humans may be impacting the surrounding environment and how we measure this to see what's actually happening. Okay, there could be threats to underwater communities from global climate change, and this can include rising temperatures, the melting of the world's glaciers, and this producing possible changes to ocean chemistry. All right, so you can see there that this area of undersea exploration will certainly take into account Key Largo and the underwater laboratory there that is called the Aquarius Lab, which actually FIU is now having a big part in. So if you're interested, check out the Aquarius Lab in Key Largo and what FIU is doing in those efforts. So what are we talking about? What is acidification and how does it threaten the life in the world's oceans? Well, you can see in front of you a pH scale. Okay, that means percent hydrogen, and that's the amount of dissolved hydrogen ions within the ocean water itself. You can see that the ocean water, by nature, is somewhere a little bit above pure water in terms of its level of pH. And so you can see that 7 is considered neutral, and that would be pure H2O, pure water. And we know, or hopefully we know at this point, that ocean water contains more than just pure H2O, and it has other dissolved substances within the water, specifically salt, as you may know, and this will change some of the ideas of acidification. Okay, so acidification is when a pH level is less than 7, and the waters will become more basic when they have a pH level of greater than 7.0. All right, so it seems that the oceans have realized a 30% increase in acidity from an 8.2 to an 8.1 on a logarithmic scale. That doesn't seem like much, but we realize that the pH scale is logarithmic, that each one is 10 times as influential as the previous. So a 0.1 difference, or a tenth of a point, towards the acid end of the scale, meaning it's dropped from 8.2 to 8.1. Definitely shows a trend into the acidification of the ocean water, meaning the water seems to be coming back from tests as resulting in more acidic levels. Okay, the most extreme is, say, something like hydrochloric acid, lemon juice, soft drinks, HCl, some of the stuff in your stomach, it dissolves your food. All right, but anyway, so how is this occurring? Well, fossil fuel burning and deforestation have released about 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. This is a theme that we've been going across the course, and now we're going to see how it might impact into the oceans. So you may wonder, say, well, what the heck? I thought it went into the atmosphere. I thought you're telling me that the ocean is getting more acidic. Well, how are the oceans and the atmospheres connected? Well, it's important to realize that levels are the highest in about 800,000 years and changing too fast for organisms to adapt. How do we know this? Yes, again, they go back into the ice records, the cryogenic records, the fossil records, and they can tell. They can do scientific research that lets us know levels of carbon dioxide within the atmosphere. And based on this sampling of ocean environments, 30% of all the CO2 released by humans in the last 200 years has now been absorbed by the oceans. All right, so that's what we're saying here. Basically, as a result of all of this CO2 being released into the atmosphere, the air and the ocean water mix, absolutely mix. Have you ever stand in the wave area of a particular beach, right? And you see the wave crash, and that spray that shoots up off the white crests of the waves, kind of giving you this kind of salty spray in the air. Right. Well, imagine that happens across the entire planet's oceans through winds and disruption, storms and everything. Right. So the ocean air and the water are, the ocean and the atmospheric air are all constantly mixing. Right. And as pH changes, the availability of nitrogen and iron will change. Higher in some areas, lower in others, and it will threaten the stability of all marine ecosystems. So that's kind of what we have going here. Before the Industrial Revolution, the ocean had an estimated pH level of approximately 8.2, and you can see the distribution of essentially ocean acidities around the planet. Obviously, there's a stronger emphasis around the equatorial regions, and so there's a region, there's our patterns occurring. And how do we get this information? People went out and took the information. They went out in ships and tested the water. Right? Ocean pH will continue to drop significantly if we do not curtail fossil use in our release of extra CO2. So in the year 2100, you can see that projection ocean pH levels are basically they're becoming more acidic. Well, the pH level is dropping and therefore becoming more acidic. All right. The increase in ocean acidity correlates to with the increase in CO2 dissolved in the seawater and atmospheric CO2 concentrations. And if you look at the table down on the bottom right, you can see that ocean acidification has increased over time. Seawater percent carbon dioxide has increased over time, and seawater pH has decreased over time, therefore producing more acidic waters. Okay. When we look at this idea of acidification, we want to see, well, how can we see how acidification is happening within the ocean ecosystems? and we can look at a few things occurring in the ocean, and we can see a number of things. We can look at coral reefs, our beautiful coral reefs, and we can see how vibrant and healthy are these reefs and how colorful are they. All right. We can look at what's called positive feedback potential with ocean acidification. We can see that if there's less plankton, that means there's less CO2, which is taken in by the organisms. All right, and more is left in the oceans. So as the CO2 increases, if the plankton are not taking up, the ocean water must be absorbing it. And we can also see that CO2 is bubbling out of volcanic vents naturally. And this does occur all over the ocean, well, in specific places, to release out this gas. And this is a natural occurrence, just like there is a lot of occurrence of natural oil being introduced into the ocean that is not a result from human-spawn spills. Okay. Negative feedback potential with climate change. We can see less nitrification, means that there's less nitrous oxide is produced and less is released into the atmosphere. So the changes initiated by climate change may actually produce cooling. This is one of the ideas behind global climate change, where people kind of stop using the words global warming so regularly and kind of replacing it with global climate change, as we realize some of the impacts of these CO2 fluctuations within the atmosphere and the ocean systems, how they affect the marine life and physical oceanic systems. We can see that some places would produce actually global cooling. Okay, so this might occur as well, and we can use plankton as a measure of this, and we can see how the plankton is going to use this type of CO2 and N2O chemicals within the ocean atmospheric system. So there are ways in which we can look at these processes happening, and one of those ways is the looking and studying of plankton in the seawater and seeing what's happening as a result of these introduced CO2 gases. So where do the CO2 gases from? Well, they occur from the burning of fossil fuels. They enter into the atmosphere. They provide extra CO2 because we're basically breaking down organic compounds within the process of combustion and fuel generation, and that will then introduce itself in the atmosphere, and the global wind systems will blow it around the globe, which will then get released and mixed into the oceanic waters, okay, where the CO2 is converted into basically carbonic acid. Which will then dissociate to release the positive hydrogen ion. When you mix that CO2 plus H2O, which is that water, you're going to bring up a chemical reaction, which will basically end up causing the ability for animals to not create the calcium carbonate shell formation that they require to produce their exoskeletons, or exoskeletons, if you will. So, for example, if you have a hermit crab and its hermit crab is living in a shell and it needs the ability to create that shell. Well, let's not use a hermit crab. We can use coral, okay? The only reason is because the hermit crabs basically steals shells from that have already been growing from somewhere else. But we'll take a coral which needs that calcium carbonate to make the shells at which it needs to grow, right? If it can't make that, if it doesn't have the materials to make that, then it can't grow. All right. In addition, if the material that the coral is living in, like the water that it's living in, is higher in the acidity level, then it could reduce the ability for the corals to associate the calcium carbonate into the shell formation or the coral structure it needs to live. All right, so what ends up happening is it breaks down. Okay, and by breaking down, you then take a viable animal, and you basically end up dissolving its structure, its way to house itself and keep itself away from, say, predators, for example. And so, small organisms in different parts of the ocean will see the effects. You can see here that there is an experiment based on the predictions in the year 2100 of calcium carbonate levels. And you can see that these live and healthy pteropods here have normal shells. And on day one, you can see that there's kind of a healthy spiral structure going on there. Um, rates of CO2 absorbed from the atmosphere produced by ocean organisms. Right? So we can see that there is direct evidence that this stuff will be detrimental to coral reefs. So basically, the acidification will try to reduce that ability to sustainably grow coral reefs in areas of the world. So why do we even care? Well, we got to think about this from an ecosystems perspective, and this based on the marine ecosystems perspective and their diversity. And what does the reef do to support this diversity? Well, oceans make up about 70% of the Earth's surface and have more diversity than all land masses combined. 75% of coral reefs around the world are threatened by human activities and environmental changes. And you can see the red dots placed on this graph are showing you some of the major reef systems around the world, including reefs in Florida, which contain more than 80 species of coral and about 400 species in fish. More so around the equator, you can see some of the coral reefs. And interestingly, check out California, right next to that 30 degrees north latitude text. California doesn't necessarily have big coral reefs systems. All right, one of the differences by diving in the west coast versus the east coast. However, in the west coast, you can get some really cool kelp forests and other oceanic ecosystems as well. You can see that there's Hawaii out there with all those dots stringed along, and of course you have the Caribbean and beyond, and out in the South Pacific there are hundreds and hundreds of coral reefs stringing along down in the South Pacific Ocean, and thousands of fish species that occur within these ecosystems. Right? So there's major reefs around the world, but how are they faring out? Okay, well, it's based on evidence, experiential evidence, or I should say empirical evidence, but people going out and doing this and going out and looking and studying systematically at these reefs around the world, which, by the way, you could do as well if you have interest. We can make predictions and estimations that basically right now about 22% of the Caribbean and Atlantic ocean coral reefs have been destroyed. 59% in the Indian Ocean. And we're looking at Southeast and East Asia, about 34%. So what's happening? Well, of course, there's major loss of reefs around the world. So we are seeing that the physical structures of the reefs are declining. How are they declining? Well, acidification is reducing the ability for healthy reefs to grow. If we're reducing that ability for reefs to grow, then we're going to be losing those reefs as they slowly die out over time and do not get replaced with viable new reef. They just turn into a old, unusable coral skeleton. All right. So the major reefs around the world include the Pacific Ocean, about 7% loss, and a high of 59% in the Indian Oceans. And so, if we're reducing the stands or the areas of the ecosystems that these diverse coral reefs play, well, what other forces are happening on these systems? Well, we just saw in a previous slide that in the coral reefs, there's extreme high biodiversity, okay? Because the reefs provide ecosystems where a lot of things can eat and a lot of other things eat the other things that are eating the reef. I mean, it's one of those food web trophic level extraordinaires that we learned about before. So by looking at this, we can say, well, okay, if we want to go eat the fish, if we want to have some sort of fish for lunch, where are we going to get it? Well, a great chance of being able to find that fish or species that we want are near where that fish gets its own food. And many times that fish is going to get its own food on either other fish or organisms in the coral reef systems. So when we say we want to go eat some fish, we got to go send out the boats, the fishing vessels, to go get the ships, and oftentimes we can find ourselves basically overfishing in places where these fish and species are that we want to eat. So overfishing changes the community composition and will disrupt relationships between and among any organisms that might be remaining around, near and around, I should say, the reef. It doesn't have to be necessarily living on top of the reef. The reef ecosystem will extend a bit far beyond the reach of the own actual physical coral itself. And that's because they live in an ocean, fish can swim around, and there's currents that drift things. But the reefs are kind of the structure, the mainstay things that cause think about walking into the food court in the mall and you smell that food, a couple of aisles or a quarter away. You can smell it, and it's still part of your existence within that thing, but you're not in the food court yet. Right? So this is all kind of happening. Well, everything can get affected from overfishing. All right. And what else might happen? Well, of course, there's coastal development. Coastal development, people want to live and build on the ocean. It's beautiful. It's a place to see, and it's a sense of transportation and energy and food. So traditionally, people lived on waterways and lakes, and specifically ocean fronts, because that's how we explored and traveled to new lands, and that's where we stayed because we could easily move things around, and we could fish and for food and trade and everything else. Well, that development continues today. I mean, around the globe, people want to live near the ocean. So, but coastal development, unfortunately, all right, as nice as it is to live by the water, not only are you more affected by potential sea level change and increased levels in huge storms and hurricanes that are coming through, but it brings runoff and sedimentation into those water ecosystems. Because all of the water is basically draining into the oceans in some form or another, it's going to bring those agricultural runoffs, those different types of fertilizers, sediment, and then what it does is it decreases that ability for nice, clean oceanic water for these systems to evolve in. I mean, it's just like, why do we separate smoking sections in airports? It's because we don't want everyone to have to walk through the smoking section, because it adds a whole bunch of other pollutions and sediments and things into the air. The same thing happens into the water. But that's what happens when we develop by the sea. We lose ecosystem services. Okay? So when we lose ecosystem services, we have to wonder, how do they actually get there? And there's something called an estuary. All right, the estuary is where seawater and land water systems kind of mix. All right, so the water is slightly brackish at times, and also depends on a bit of the tide schedules to see how far up the freshwater system, even underground, too, underwater systems as well, can have saltwater intrusions and this kind of thing. So there is a method for the freshwater to interact with the saltwater and ultimately make its way out into the coral reef system. Okay, so that's what's happening here. The ecosystem services that it can provide in this particular place: temperature moderation, nutrient cycling, habitats, commercial fishing, storm protections, water purification, medicines, perhaps, CO2 absorption, etc. All right. So we have this estuary mixing and these ecosystem services, and all of this is kind of occurring within these highly valuable areas of land. The Aquarius Reef Base, which is and has the base in Key Largo, which you'll see more of within this unit. It has an apparatus used to assess the respiration rates of the brown algae sponge by measuring the CO2 production. High CO2 means high respiration rates, and so they're doing experiments to try to understand this. Right. So by looking at some of these things, we can look at further. How does the ecosystem now, a diverse ecosystem, even affect other places? Sorry, my phone was on silent, so I thought. And we can look and see that basically we live. There's the continental shelf, and then that thing kind of lives. Is there's an intertidal zone, and there's that estuary, right? The estuaries are leading that fresh water into the salt water, and they mix based on the tides. And then you get to the intertidal zone. That intertidal zone is like where the high and low tides occur, and you have tide pools, and lots of stuff hangs out there. Um, and as you move further out towards the open ocean, there are different zones. Epipelagic, the zone where most of your kind of normal fish are hanging around, not too deep. Typically in the sunlight zone, 60 meters, 80 meters, somewhere down there. Sunlight will penetrate into the ocean, so you can actually still see the sunlight. Then you get down a little bit further into that twilight zone, where you can call it the meso and bathypelagic zone. These are animals that are adapted for a little bit deeper, lower light levels, and are found further down the further depths of the ocean. You are increasing your darkness, and you ultimately get into what's called the abyssal zone. This is now getting extremely deep. We're over at a minimum of 4,000 meters, roughly 13,000 feet down, and ultimately in deep oceanic trenches, such as the Marianas Trench, you might have the Heddle zone, which will have animals in complete darkness, no bones, very much very low reproducing rates. Um, Interesting because it's so dark and the pressures down there are absolutely fantastically huge. So they'll crush you and I if we were down there. So you can see this in this diagram right here that within the continental shelf you have the most diversity. You have all these amazing species that are interacting with river runoff, right? Land. You can see the corals there. You can see things hanging out. But like we were saying, what does this happen to do with the other parts of the oceans that extend beyond this area? Well, in the epipelagic zone, larger fish will frequently come in and feed on some of these fish, and then go back out to travel around and find mates. And as they move through their particular life cycles, they will be reproducing and going to different parts of the globe to do their thing and to get their eating, to get enough food for them to eat. Dead animals, after they die, also will fall down based on gravity, and they'll slowly drift down through the abyssal zone. So all that energy that was captured all the way up by the continental shelf into the intertidal zone and the coral reef zone may interact with the epipelagic zone, and even the meso and bathypelagic zone could get eaten. But when they die, they will fall down to certain depths at times, and finally possibly reach the abyssal zone, where the anglerfish we can see there might have a chance to get a certain snack, or some of the deep sea jellies or corals. I'm sorry, worms and things would be able to find back. Well, just to recall, the oceanic zones are all kind of interconnected, with a bulk of the operation and diversity happening within the intertidal and the coral reef zones way up near the sun. Right? And if this is what's happening, then we need to understand how this can affect the rest of the ocean. So if ocean acidification is affecting these coral reefs, and these coral reefs are providing such a diverse part of an oceanic ecosystem, we need to study them, and we need to understand, can coral reefs live in an environment in an increasing acidification of ocean water? We've seen that they certainly can't under the current conditions, meaning that their shells and the coral itself will start to dissolve based on the levels of acidity and the absence of the ability to sequester basically calcium carbonate to create their shells. Okay, but can they change is a question. Can they adapt to the ocean acidification? And these are ongoing experiments right now that are designed to do a couple of experimental procedures by looking at metabolic rate of corals and looking at for special adaptations in deep crevice species to see if they possibly are um, doing anything that might be reflecting the base different oceanic and chemistry conditions at their levels. We can gauge the impact of the prior exposure to transplant success. When you look at transplanting of basically coral polyps around from different depths and different parts of the sea, and we can also then look at how the coral population is faring out by conducting a census of reefs, especially in the deep crevice reefs. All right, so we can study these things, and this diagram here is, doing you probably more service than you really want at this point in the game to understand how scientists can study these particular coral species. And if you're more interested in marine biology, for example, take marine biology and go talk to the marine biologists and realize, you know what, this is happening from an environmental standard situation, but how does this happen? You love these coral reefs. You want to get more involved in understanding what's going on. You can do so. And by doing so, you'll definitely be able to understand these particular diagrams even more. And moving forward. All right. But one of the things you may very well know is if you are a diver or scuba diver, snorkeler or skin diver, or just love the ocean and have a chance to get out and see underwater films, photography, or whatever, the bleaching of the corals that actually look pretty neat. The white corals you see are actually not in great shape. The bleaching coral means that the healthy part of the coral, the zooanthellae, the things that live in the coral, the plants that live in the coral, basically, that take up sunlight and produce the coral, have died or have gone. So when you see the white coral reefs, it is indicative of coral bleaching. And this is a result of stressful conditions such as a decrease in light levels based on increase of sedimentation or pollution in the area. There could be an increase or significant decrease in temperature, as the corals are very susceptible to the temperature in which they live. So there's different interspecific interactions in corals that can help you understand how well the coral is living. Okay, so if there's no corals to live on, then there might be no clownfish to swim around the corals, and there will be no sea anemones. If there's no sea anemones, there's nothing for clownfish to eat. So there is a useful interaction between many of the animals that live among the corals that are used to provide for protection, and we can see that all of the animals will ultimately disappear if there's nothing left over. Take a flock of cattle, put them in an area where there's fertile grasses, and they will continue to eat the grasses, and they will move along until the grass is no longer fertile. And behind the cattle, you will have unusable land, and you won't find anything really there because it can't sustain the cattle. The same thing happens down here under the sea. All right, 25% of all ocean species spend at least some time in coral reefs. Yes, even those ones that are deeper into the sea, like I mentioned, they come up to reproduce, find food, indirectly or directly, by being able to pass on those trophic energy levels to all stages of the food chain. All right. So, reefs around the world can easily be considered the ultimate keystone species because of all this. Okay, the threats that they're facing are the rising sea levels, which will then create a larger distance for light to penetrate, and then therefore reduces the basically the efficiency of photosynthesis by submerged plants. The increased flooding can produce more pollutants that run off, heavy losses of top predators, and ocean food webs will disrupt interdependent relationships based on overfishing or overhunting. Please do not ever eat shark fin soup. Mechanical disruption of reefs caused by trawlers and fishing. That's literally the breaking apart, physical breaking apart of these systems. And then large kind of overfishing methods, such as cyanide sprays and dynamite, which are used to collect fish for retail. Not only do they kill the fish, they kill everything else. It's kind of like the DDT we used in Vietnam to make all the leaves fall off the trees so the people in the helicopters could see the enemy even closer. Well, it worked, but it also got into the skin of all the human beings living in the area and caused hugely painful medical problems and death. Sediment from agriculture causes algae to flourish and smothers corals, kind of like if you have a fish tank at home and you let it turn green and gross, right? The algae will look great, but everything inside will go horrible. Plus, the algae is just going to consume a lot of the things that other things will need in there to live. And obviously, boats and ships introduce invasive species as global shipping industry continues to be a global dominator as we become an increasingly worldly economy. Ships from the South China Seas are bringing up waters that will be dispersed into, say, the North Atlantic on a shipping through their use, basically through their bilge pumps, where their ships take water in and expel water out to help control its level stability in the land, as well as pump out any water that has entered into the hull through wave action or storm action or anything else. Right? You can see in this top picture that sediments dumped into the oceans can cause algal blooms. And this does not increase the healthiness of the water systems. If you're interested, read a book called And the Waters Turn to Blood. It's a great discussion about marine biology and how water can affect the fish living in it. We can see the dynamite and oil spills obviously have a big effect on the oceanic ecosystems. And of course the plastic bags, which can be eaten by turtles and everything else, could be cause them to die. And overfishing will certainly take away the ability for the healthy ecosystems to maintain fisheries that we need to live. So overfishing is a great example of a project or something you might want to get involved in for the course, or somewhere you want to move into if you're interested in marine policy, marine environmental policy. Overfishing is a great one, and especially if you're interested in world policy change, check out ocean fishing or overfishing in the Mediterranean and African and European fisheries. All right. So there's many threats. We've gone over this stuff and what it is you can do. Your textbook outlines what these are. You can go through and see what these are and read about some of the effects that we've talked about over the last few minutes. All right. But there are ways we can increase the productivity of the oceans and keep the biodiversity. The best way to save the oceans may be to change the way we live on land. That's basically the bottom line. Reducing the amount of CO2s which can interfere with the oceanic chemistry. And those are definitely things we can do. Among other things, when you go to the beach, especially Miami Beach, Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, wherever you go, please do not leave your trash and bags and bottles behind. Also, please chop up your six-pack containers so they do not go out and strangle the turtles and the fish and everything else. But just don't leave any of it behind. If you go there, have a great time, enjoy the sun, enjoy the water, but take all your trash with you and go out. When you go out diving or snorkeling, don't even touch the reef. Look at it, check it out. If you're anchoring your boat, please make sure that there's no reef right below you. You want to find a nice sandy spot to drop that anchor. Plus, the anchors are designed for sandy spots anyway, so that's where you want to put your anchors to be safe. And decrease your fossil fuel use, absolutely. If you want to do more of a group work, you can lead a discussion about this. Oceania, Our Endangered Oceans and What We Can Do to Save Them by Ted Danson. But otherwise, you can follow up with groups like the Coral Reef Alliance or Oceania on Facebook or Twitter and learn what you can do specifically in your backyard and all of the different agencies in this area that are dedicated to ocean preservation. And if you really love it, go to a pet store and ask your owners or aquarium supply centers, where do they get their fish? isn't, and are they okay? And do they get fished by poisoning certain parts of reefs using cyanide? And think about your legislators and how we can preserve our oceanic ecosystems. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.